Hello, especially for the Dirty Secrets channel.
Rebecca Matthews had always prided herself on the stability of her marriage. 15 years with Daniel had taught her the rhythm of companionship, the comfortable silences, the shared jokes no one else understood, the way he always placed his hand on the small of her back when they walked through a crowded room. Their life in Boston moved with the predictable cadence of success, her rising career as a museum curator, his increasingly prominent position at a multinational consulting firm. The business trips had begun 5 years ago. First, they were infrequent, a weekend in Chicago, 3 days in Toronto. But as Daniel's responsibilities grew, so did his absences. London, Singapore, Dubai. 2 weeks away, 1 week home. It was the price of ambition, he explained, kissing her forehead as he packed his precisely folded shirts into his carry-on. Just a few more years of this, he'd promise. Then I'll take that director position they've been dangling. No more traveling. Rebecca had built her life around those absences, filling the empty spaces with her work, her friends, the pottery class she'd always wanted to take. She had constructed a parallel life, one for when Daniel was home and one for when he was away. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and she trusted in its foundation. "I've got to fly to Frankfurt tomorrow," Daniel said one evening in October, his voice casual as he chopped vegetables for dinner. "Last-minute thing. The Weber account is in trouble." Rebecca nodded, used to these announcements. "How long this time? 10 days, maybe 12. I'll make it up to you when I get back." She smiled, believing him as she always had. "You always do." The invitation to the International Museum Conservation Conference in Barcelona had been a professional courtesy, nothing more. Rebecca hadn't planned to attend until her assistant director pushed her. "You haven't taken a trip for yourself in years," Meg insisted. "Besides, Barcelona in November? Crowds are gone, but the weather's still gorgeous." So Rebecca found herself wandering down La Rambla 3 days after Daniel had left for Frankfurt, enjoying the unusual freedom of traveling alone. The Mediterranean light cast a golden hue over everything, softening the edges of the world. She felt lighter here, as if she'd shed a skin she hadn't known was weighing her down. She turned onto a narrow side street, following a recommendation for a local cafe known for its churros and chocolate. The little plaza opened before her like a secret, with wrought iron tables scattered beneath orange trees. Her eyes swept across the scene, appreciating the tableau of local life: an old man reading a newspaper, a young couple with their heads bent together, a businessman in a gray suit laughing with a striking woman in a red dress. Rebecca froze mid-step. The businessman turned slightly, his profile catching the slanting afternoon light. The familiar slope of the nose, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed, the gesture of his hand as he reached for his coffee cup, movements Rebecca had memorized over 15 years of marriage. Daniel. In Barcelona, not Frankfurt. With a woman whose hand he was now covering with his own in a gesture of unmistakable intimacy. Rebecca stepped behind a stone column, her heart hammering against her ribs. She felt suddenly as if she were watching a film of someone else's life. This couldn't be real. Daniel was in Frankfurt, wrestling with the Weber account, sleeping in that chain hotel he always complained about. Yet there he sat, not 30 feet away, looking more relaxed than she had seen him in years. Back in her hotel room, Rebecca paced the patterned carpet, her mind racing through explanations. The man simply looked like Daniel. A doppelganger, a coincidence of genetics that had momentarily tricked her eyes. Barcelona was full of international businessmen. Surely they all owned the same gray suits, had the same haircuts. But she couldn't shake the certainty. The way he held his shoulders. The familiar gold watch glinting on his wrist, her 10th anniversary gift to him. She pulled out her phone, her fingers hovering over Daniel's number. One call would clarify everything. He would answer from his hotel room in Frankfurt, the background noise of German television confirming his location, and she could laugh about seeing his twin in a Spanish plaza. She didn't call. Instead, she opened her laptop and logged into their shared credit card account. The digital trail was instant and damning, a charge from a Barcelona restaurant 2 nights ago, a hotel she didn't recognize, an upscale clothing store with a Spanish name. There could be an explanation, she whispered to the empty room. A last-minute change of plans. A client emergency he didn't want to bother me with. But even as the words left her mouth, they sounded hollow. Daniel had texted her just that morning, complaining about the rain in Frankfurt, asking if she'd remembered to water the orchid in their bedroom. Rebecca curled up on the hotel bed, still in her clothes, and stared at the ceiling until daylight crept through the curtains. The next morning, Rebecca returned to the plaza, arriving early and selecting a table with a clear view but partially shielded by a large potted palm. She ordered coffee she couldn't taste and waited, her stomach in knots. 3 hours passed. She was about to leave when they appeared, Daniel and the woman in red, now wearing a casual cream sweater that draped elegantly off one shoulder. They weren't heading for the cafe but walking through the plaza toward the narrow street leading to the Gothic quarter. Before she could question her actions, Rebecca gathered her purse and followed at a discreet distance. Couple moved with the ease of people who knew their way, occasionally stopping to point out architectural details to each other. Daniel's hand rested on the small of the woman's back, the same gesture he'd always used with Rebecca. They led her through winding medieval streets to a small art gallery. Through the window, Rebecca watched as Daniel greeted the owner like an old friend, exchanging kisses on both cheeks. The woman moved confidently through the space, discussing pieces with animated gestures. They stayed for nearly an hour before continuing to a restaurant tucked away on a quiet corner. As they settled at an outdoor table, Rebecca heard the woman laugh, a musical sound that carried across the street. She watched Daniel reach across the table to tuck a strand of hair behind the woman's ear, his expression tender in a way that felt like a physical blow to Rebecca's chest. She couldn't hear their conversation, but she didn't need to. The body language told her everything, the easy familiarity, the shared references, the casual intimacy built over time. This wasn't a fling. This was a relationship. Rebecca followed them for 3 days, building a picture that grew more painful with each discovery. The woman's name was Alessandra. She owned the gallery where they'd spent so much time. She lived in a sunlit apartment in the Example district, where Daniel appeared completely at home, retrieving items from drawers without having to search, knowing exactly where to find wine glasses and which cabinet held the coffee. From conversations overheard in cafes and pieced together like a grotesque puzzle, Rebecca learned that Daniel's consulting firm had no office in Barcelona. His trips to Frankfurt had been to Barcelona for at least 2 years. His colleagues in Boston thought he split his time between international offices, while in reality, he was building a second life with Alessandra. On the third evening, sitting at a bar across from Alessandra's apartment building, Rebecca watched as lights came on in the third-floor windows. Through the gauzy curtains, she could see Daniel moving about, setting a table for dinner. The domesticity of it was unbearable. Her phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Frankfurt is freezing. Missing you. How's the conference?" Rebecca stared at the message, then back at the warm glow of the apartment where her husband was preparing dinner for another woman. The double life was so complete, so meticulously constructed, that she wondered if she had ever known Daniel at all. Rebecca didn't remember returning to her hotel. She found herself sitting on the bathroom floor, her back against the cold tile, sobs tearing through her body with such force she feared she might shatter. Years of memories kaleidoscoped through her mind, rearranging themselves into new patterns of deception. The missed anniversaries due to unavoidable meetings. The late-night calls that had to be taken in the home office behind closed doors. The sudden influx of money he'd attributed to bonuses and investments. All lies, constructed with such precision that she'd never questioned them. She dragged herself to the shower, turning the water as hot as she could stand, as if it might scald away the humiliation that clung to her skin. Under the pounding water, her mind swung between extremes. Confront him immediately. Say nothing, return to Boston and hire a divorce attorney. Set fire to Alessandra's apartment with both of them inside. The raw fury surprised her. Rebecca had always prided herself on her emotional control, her reasoned approach to conflict. But this betrayal had unleashed something primal within her, a wounded animal seeking retribution. As the water ran cold, clarity began to emerge through the fog of pain. She needed to understand the full scope of the deception before confronting it. How deep did the lies go? How much of their shared life was fiction? She stepped out of the shower, wrapping herself in the hotel's plush robe, and reached for her phone. With trembling fingers, she began to search, looking not for more evidence of betrayal but for the architecture of Daniel's double life. Rebecca canceled her return flight and extended her hotel stay. Conference provided perfect cover. Daniel would expect her to be busy with panels and networking events, not searching for the truth of his deception. She began methodically, treating the investigation like one of her museum research projects. Financial records came first. Their joint account showed nothing unusual, but by accessing Daniel's private email through a password he'd used for years, the name of his childhood dog followed by his birth year, how had someone so calculating been so careless? She discovered a separate bank account established 3 years ago. Regular transfers moved money from their joint savings to this account, disguised as investments in a fictional consulting side business. Pieces began falling into place with sickening precision. Daniel's consulting firm did indeed have a Frankfurt office, which provided the perfect alibi. He would fly to Frankfurt, make a show of checking into his hotel, then take a quick flight to Barcelona, where he became a different man. A man who was building a life with Alessandra. Through social media searches, Rebecca discovered photos of them together dating back nearly 3 years, carefully curated to avoid any professional connections that might expose the deception, but unmistakably a couple with history. In one image from the previous summer, they stood on a yacht, Daniel's arm around Alessandra's waist, the Mediterranean sparkling behind them. The date coincided with what Rebecca had been told was a corporate retreat in Switzerland. The most devastating discovery came from property records. 6 months earlier, Daniel had purchased a seaside villa outside Barcelona, a short drive up the coast. Paperwork listed him as Daniel Matthews, married to Alessandra Rossi. He had presented himself as a widower, free to remarry. In the eyes of his Barcelona life, Rebecca was already dead. Rebecca chose Alessandra's gallery for the confrontation. Public enough to prevent an explosive scene, private enough for the conversation that needed to happen. She dressed carefully that morning, her most expensive dress, hair perfectly styled, makeup immaculate, armor for the battle ahead. She entered the gallery during a quiet afternoon hour. Alessandra was alone, arranging a display of ceramics. She looked up with a professional smile that faltered slightly at the sight of an unfamiliar woman studying her so intently. "Can I help you find something?" Alessandra asked in accented English. "I believe you can," Rebecca replied, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "I'm looking for my husband, Daniel Matthews." The transformation in Alessandra's expression would have been fascinating under different circumstances: shock, confusion, then a flash of understanding followed by something like pity. "You must be mistaken," Alessandra said carefully. "My fiancé's name is Daniel, yes, but he is not married." "He is," Rebecca said, opening her purse to retrieve her phone. She pulled up a photo of them together, their last anniversary celebration, Daniel kissing her cheek as she smiled at the camera. 15 years in December. Alessandra's perfectly manicured hand gripped the edge of a display table, her knuckles whitening. Before she could respond, the door to the gallery opened and Daniel stepped inside. Time seemed to stop as he registered the tableau before him, his wife and his lover facing each other across the polished concrete floor, his double life collapsing like a house of cards. "Rebecca," he said, her name barely audible. "What are you doing in Frankfurt?" she finished for him, surprised by the cold clarity of her voice. "I might ask you the same question." Daniel's face drained of color. He moved to stand between the two women, as if he could somehow still keep his worlds separate. "This isn't how I wanted you to find out," he began. "Find out what, exactly?" Rebecca asked. "That you've been living a double life?" That you bought a villa with money from our joint savings? That you told this woman you were a widower?" Alessandra made a small, wounded sound. "Daniel, what is she saying?" "He's been lying to both of us," Rebecca said, turning to Alessandra. "Though I suspect you're getting the better version of him these days. He seems happier here." Daniel's expression hardened, the shock giving way to something colder, more calculated. He straightened his shoulders, and in that moment, Rebecca saw a stranger wearing her husband's face. "I was going to tell you," he said, his voice taking on a businesslike tone she recognized from his difficult client calls. "After the new year, I've consulted attorneys. The settlement will be more than fair." Clinical detachment stunned her more than any angry outburst could have. He'd planned this, mapped out the dismantling of their marriage with the same precision he applied to his consulting projects. "How generous," Rebecca said, the words tasting like ash. "And when were you going to mention the money laundering?" Daniel froze. "What are you talking about?" "The Weber account. The one that's supposedly in trouble in Frankfurt? I looked into it. Company doesn't exist. It's a shell corporation you created 3 years ago." Rebecca watched recognition dawn on his face. "What I haven't figured out yet is whose money you're cleaning through it." Alessandra was the first to recover, moving swiftly to the gallery door and flipping the sign to closed. She turned to Daniel, her expression a complex mixture of betrayal and fear. "She knows about Weber?" Alessandra asked, her accent thickening with stress. Daniel rubbed his hand across his face. "She's bluffing. She can't know anything substantial." "I know enough," Rebecca said, her heart pounding as she stepped deeper into waters she hadn't intended to navigate. The money laundering had been a calculated guess based on irregularities she'd noticed in the financial records, but their reactions confirmed her suspicions. "I know that you've moved over 4 million euros through that account in the past 2 years. I know that some of it traces back to art purchases through this gallery." Alessandra paled, moving away from Daniel. "You promised this was safe. That no one could connect us." "It is safe," Daniel insisted, his voice taking on an edge Rebecca had never heard before. "Rebecca doesn't have access to that information. She's trying to manipulate us." Rebecca maintained her composure, though internally she was reeling. She had stumbled onto something far darker than infidelity. "Transactions are in our shared Dropbox, Daniel. The one you use for backup files. Did you really think I wouldn't look there?" Daniel's expression shifted from calculated to dangerous. "How much do you know about the Caretti group?" The name meant nothing to Rebecca, but she didn't let her confusion show. "Enough to understand why you've been so anxious about the Weber account." Alessandra moved to the back of the gallery, her arms wrapped protectively around herself. "This is not what I agreed to, Daniel. Art acquisition, legitimate investments, not this." "It was always this," Daniel said, his attention still fixed on Rebecca. "The art was just a convenient vehicle." The gallery felt suddenly too small, the air too thick. Rebecca realized with cold clarity that she was no longer confronting a cheating husband, but something far more dangerous. "I haven't gone to anyone with this information," she said carefully. "I wanted to understand first." Daniel studied her face, searching for deception. "The Caretti group isn't the kind of organization that appreciates loose ends, Rebecca. If you know about Weber, you've put yourself in danger." "Are you threatening me?" she asked, her voice remarkably steady. "I'm warning you," he corrected. "These people don't make distinctions between knowing and not knowing once someone gets too close." Alessandra had moved to her desk, her hands busy with something Rebecca couldn't see. "Daniel is right about that much," she said. "But he's wrong about everything else. Caretti Group isn't just some criminal organization. It's my family's business." Daniel's head snapped toward Alessandra with such force that Rebecca thought he might have injured himself. "What are you talking about?" Alessandra straightened, her vulnerability replaced by a cold composure. Did you really think you were the architect of all this? That we selected your firm at random? That I happened to fall in love with the exact consultant who could help move our money? Understanding broke across Daniel's face like a wave. You played me. We employed you, Alessandra corrected. The relationship was a convenient way to ensure your loyalty. You were very convincing in your unhappiness with your marriage. It wasn't difficult to give you what you thought you wanted. Rebecca felt as though she had wandered onto a stage in the middle of a play she hadn't rehearsed for. The betrayal she had come to confront had twisted into something unrecognizable. So where does that leave us? She asked, looking between them. Daniel seemed to have aged a decade in minutes, the confident facade crumbling to reveal a man who had been manipulated as thoroughly as he had manipulated others. It leaves us with a significant problem, Alessandra said, pulling a phone from her desk drawer. You know too much about our operations, Rebecca. And Daniel has proven himself unreliable. They kept Rebecca in the gallery's back office for hours, the windows darkening as Alessandra made a series of calls in rapid Italian. Daniel sat in sullen silence, occasionally attempting to catch Rebecca's eye, but she refused to look at him. The man who arrived as night fell was elegantly dressed, with silver temples and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. He introduced himself as Marco Caretti and spoke perfect English with only the faintest trace of an accent. Mrs. Matthews, he said, studying her with uncomfortable intensity. My niece tells me you've uncovered some sensitive information. Rebecca met his gaze steadily. Not intentionally. Intention rarely matters in outcomes, he replied. But method does. You were thorough in your investigation, yes? Careful. She nodded, unsure where this was leading. Marco glanced at Daniel, his expression dismissive. Your husband was less careful. Sloppy, in fact. Using personal devices for business, storing records where they could be found, allowing his emotional entanglements to compromise security. Daniel started to protest, but Marco silenced him with a slight gesture. Question now is what to do about this situation. Rebecca felt the weight of the moment. Whatever she said next might determine not just her marriage but her safety. She thought of her life in Boston, the museum, her friends, the routines and relationships that had defined her for years. I have a proposition, she said, surprised by her own calm. You need someone careful, thorough, with an eye for detail and discretion. My work in art restoration and authentication requires all those qualities. Marco's eyebrows rose slightly. You're offering your services? I'm offering a solution, Rebecca clarified. Your organization presumably acquires and moves art as part of its operations. I can ensure those pieces are properly valued, documented, and authenticated without raising flags. Alessandra looked skeptical. Why would you help us? Rebecca finally turned to Daniel. Because my life in Boston ended the moment I saw you in that plaza. There's nothing for me to go back to. Daniel flinched as if she'd struck him. Rebecca, you don't know what you're saying. These people offered me honesty, she interrupted. Which is more than you ever did. Marco was watching her with newfound interest. You understand that accepting such a position would mean certain restrictions. You couldn't return to your previous life. I understand, Rebecca said. The words felt like signing a contract written in invisible ink, the true terms hidden until it was too late to renegotiate. Marco nodded once, decision made. We'll arrange the necessary documentation. Alessandra will handle the details. He turned to Daniel. As for you, Mr. Matthews, your services are no longer required. I suggest you use your considerable talent for fiction to explain your wife's disappearance when you return to Boston. A tragic accident, perhaps. Color drained from Daniel's face. You can't just, we can, Marco cut him off. And we have. Consider yourself fortunate that we're allowing you to leave at all. Rebecca stood, smoothing the wrinkles from her dress, the armor she'd put on for a different battle entirely. I'd like a moment alone with my husband. Marco hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes. No more. When the door closed behind him and Alessandra, Daniel moved toward Rebecca. This is insanity. You can't trust them. We need to go to the authorities, tell them everything. Like you told me everything? Rebecca asked quietly. You created this situation, Daniel. You built this trap and walked right into it, dragging me along. I never meant for any of this to happen, he whispered. Rebecca studied the face she had loved for 15 years, searching for the man she had married. That's the difference between us, she said finally. I know exactly what I'm doing. She reached up, removing her wedding ring. The platinum band caught the light as she placed it in his palm, closing his fingers around it. Goodbye, Daniel. 3 months later, Rebecca sat at a cafe in Lisbon, sipping espresso and watching tourists navigate the steep cobblestone streets. Her hair was shorter now, highlighted with subtle golden streaks that complemented her tan skin. Portuguese sun had been kind to her. Her phone buzzed with a text from Alessandra. The Matisse arrived. Authentication papers ready for review. Rebecca sent a quick acknowledgement. Her role within the Caretti operation had evolved beyond her initial proposition. Her expertise in art authenticity had proven invaluable, particularly in identifying which forgeries were good enough to pass inspection and which needed refinement. She was reviewing the gallery's latest acquisition catalog when a shadow fell across her table. "This seat taken?" asked a familiar voice. Rebecca looked up to find Daniel standing before her, thinner than she remembered, with new lines etched around his eyes. "How did you find me?" she asked, her hand instinctively moving toward her phone. "The same way you found me," he replied, pulling out the chair across from her. "I followed the trail." Rebecca's mind raced through contingency plans. Marco had been explicit about the consequences if Daniel interfered with their operations again. "You shouldn't be here," she said, keeping her voice low. "It's dangerous for both of us." Daniel leaned forward. "That's what I came to tell you. The Caretti group is under investigation by Interpol. They've been tracking art theft and money laundering operations across Europe. They're closing in, Rebecca." She maintained her composure, years of museum board meetings having taught her to hide her reactions. "And how would you know this?" "Because I've been working with them for the past 3 months. He held her gaze steadily. "It was the only way I could think to help you." Rebecca felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her. "You're working with Interpol? Against the people who threatened your life." "Against the people who are using you," he corrected. "The way they used me." She studied him, looking for signs of deception, a skill she'd honed to a fine edge in the months since Barcelona. "Why should I believe you?" Daniel reached into his jacket, slowly withdrawing a thin leather wallet. He placed it on the table and opened it to reveal an Interpol identification card with his photo. "I wasn't just a consultant in Boston," he said quietly. "That was my cover. I've been with financial crimes for 11 years. The Weber account was supposed to be my way into the Caretti operation, but Alessandra complicated things." Rebecca felt the world tilting on its axis. "You were undercover? All this time?" "Not initially," he admitted. "I was recruited after I discovered irregularities in one of my legitimate clients' accounts, traces that led back to the Caretti group. When Interpol approached me, I agreed to help." "And our marriage? Was that part of your cover too?" The question came out sharper than she'd intended. Pain flashed across his face. "Our marriage was the only real thing in my life, Rebecca. Why do you think I kept you away from this part of my work? I was trying to protect you. By lying to me for years? By letting me believe you were having an affair. The affair with Alessandra was part of my cover, It was never real. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made her chest ache. When you showed up at the gallery that day, everything fell apart. I couldn't maintain my cover and protect you at the same time. Rebecca's mind was reeling, reconstructing the past months through this new lens. So you let me believe the worst. You let me join them. I tried to warn you, he said, but Marco was watching. If I'd told you the truth then, we'd both be dead. He reached across the table, not quite touching her hand. But you're in danger now. The operation is being shut down tomorrow. Anyone connected to the Caretti group will be arrested. Rebecca pulled her hand back. Including me. Not if you come with me now, Daniel said urgently. I've arranged everything. New identities, a secure location until the arrests are complete. After that, you can decide what you want to do, testify, enter witness protection, or... Or what? She asked. Or come home, he said simply. If there's anything left to salvage between us. Rebecca looked down at her bare ring finger, then back at her husband, the agent, the liar, the man who had upended her entire existence either to protect her or to save himself. She wasn't sure which. There's something you should know, she said finally. About my role with the Carettis. Daniel tensed. Whatever it is, we can deal with it. I've been gathering evidence against them since my first week, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Every transaction, every piece of art, every name and date. I have it all documented. Confusion crossed his face. You've been building a case? Rebecca reached into her purse and extracted a small flash drive, sliding it across the table. I was going to send this to the FBI next week. Anonymous tip. Daniel stared at the drive, then back at her. You were working against them all along. I needed to understand what they were doing first, she explained. The full scope of it. Once I did. She shrugged. I couldn't be part of it, no matter what they'd threatened. A slow smile spread across Daniel's face, the real smile she remembered, not the calculated one he'd worn in Barcelona. You never stopped being you, he said softly. Even when everything else changed. Rebecca didn't return the smile. I'm still angry with you, she said. For the lies. For making me believe our entire marriage was a sham. I know, he acknowledged. And you have every right to be. But right now we need to leave. We can sort through the rest later. She looked around the cafe, at the life she'd begun to build for herself in the aftermath of destruction. Is any of it real with you, Daniel? Is there any truth to hold on to? He considered her question carefully. The truth is I've been living a double life since before I met you. Truth is I should have trusted you with it years ago. The truth is I love you more than my next breath, and I have never stopped, not for a single moment. Rebecca gathered her belongings slowly, buying time to think. The evidence of his deception was overwhelming, yet so was the evidence of his current honesty. The man before her seemed more real than the husband who had kissed her goodbye in Boston or the stranger she'd confronted in Barcelona. I can't promise anything, she said finally, standing. But I'll come with you now. Daniel nodded, relief washing over his features. That's enough for today. As they left the cafe, Rebecca felt the weight of multiple identities settling on her shoulders, the trusted wife, the betrayed woman, the criminal accomplice, the covert informant. She wondered which was real, or if perhaps they all were, facets of a self she was only beginning to understand. Portuguese sun cast their shadows long across the cobblestones as they walked away from the cafe. Two silhouettes moving in sync, yet separated by the space between truth and deception, between what was and what might still be.
Thank you for watching. If you liked the story, like, subscribe to the channel and share with your friends. Thank you.